Theodore Kryder is the district administrator for the school district of Crandon, Wisconsin, in the USA. As a school administrator, he has received the International City County Managers Association Community Partnership Program Excellence Award, gosh, that's a mouthful, for his work on creating civility. His forgiveness research identifies forgiveness as a leadership power in education. Theodore, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the podium.
Thank you. That's a tough act to follow, but I'll give it a shot. This is an amazing conference. I sat last night thinking about all of the yesterday's speakers and sitting here just before I walked up here. I'm just proud to be here. I honor everyone that's here and grateful. And I come from Wisconsin with wishes from our governor, who I've gotten to talk to about this conference, and from our state education superintendent, Dr. Evers, that I've talked to about what forgiveness in the entire state can look like. We have something called PBIS, and we're looking at maybe that forgiveness is that intrinsic value we're looking for that it might be missing. But anyway, both of them, and my school district and my students that know I'm here, are grateful and honored that you invited us. And I just come to tell my story. My story is about a leadership story. It's my path to becoming the superintendent of a small northern district or a rural district. And listening yesterday, it struck me that everyone who spoke yesterday had thousands of years of writings and teachings and people to learn from. And when we talk about forgiveness education, there isn't a lot written. In fact, when I started my doctoral research on forgiveness, it was very difficult to find articles and things to draw from. So a couple years ago, when this conference was in its infancy, I put in my phone a Google search. And every time that forgiveness and education were linked together, I was supposed to get a notification so I could kind of see the state of it. In 2 years, the only links I got were forgiveness in education for loan repayment. Yeah. So there's not a lot of traction in the state of Wisconsin. I don't know about the rest of the states, but I can speak for Wisconsin for teaching forgiveness education. I have to start with where I started in education to allow you to understand where I am and why it's so important to me. I was not a teacher by trade. These young ladies are amazing representations of what teachers should be, and they've got long careers to help kids for a long, long time. I did not come into education until I was 40 years old. I was training a principal's bird dog, because I train horses and dogs. And there we go. And the principal looked at me one day and said, "Hey, can you do with kids what you do with dogs?" I didn't really know how to take that at the time. But I said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "My math teacher just quit." And this was a Friday. School started on Tuesday. He said, I think you could probably be my math teacher. And I thought, you know what? I haven't done anything really dumb in a long time. So I nodded yes, I will go in and teach your math class. And I thought at the time it might be for a few weeks, but it started a path for me. So I was in the math class teaching one day, and it was like a week into it, so you know that I've learned my shtick. I've got attendance down and all the rudimentary things. And I had this one young lady in a freshman algebra class that would come in. And she looked like she was out of a Norman Rockwell painting or a French painting or something. She was just this cute little freshman girl. And she would sit, as I had my room arranged, in the 5 rows across and 5 deep like everyone else had, and she would sit in the middle row, second seat back, and she would come in and kick her shoes off, put her feet up on the back of the chair in front of her, and read her English work in my math class. Well, I had the chalk. I was supposed to be important. So I start, hey, page 7, open up with the rest of the class. And she had a box of cheese nips on this day. She usually had some sort of nourishment to get through my class. And finally, one of those early days, I pushed her far enough. And she stood up, as I was standing pretty next to her. She stood up, threw a handful of cheese nips at me, called me a not very nice name, and started walking out of the room. So I'm standing there in all of my teacher splendor, with cheese nips at my feet, which is a small cracker of something. And I asked the question, "Where are you going?" And she goes, "Well, to the office, of course." And she started walking out again. And I said, "Why?" And she turned and she goes, "Well, that's what a real teacher would do." And started to walk again. Well, I've got a little bit of background in some, verbal altercations, so I wasn't going to let her get the last word in. And so I said, "Well, as far as I know, they don't teach algebra in the office." And she stopped. And at that moment, she kind of looked at me, and I was like, "Yeah, come back and sit down." And she did. Now, what we did from there on is we had an awesome relationship, because as a trainer of animals, as a horse trainer, when I'm training a horse in a round pen, I have the ability to put too much pressure on that horse and send him out of that round pen. But a good trainer learns how to keep that horse in the round pen and how to connect and hook up. And what I did with that girl that day is I kept her in my room, and she forgave me. And I forgave her for throwing cheese nips, but I also asked for forgiveness for pushing her out. The other thing that it did is it helped me with every one of my other students. For some reason, if you treated people nicely with inherent human worth, they liked that. So I had this gift, I've only been in the profession a couple of weeks, and I've already figured this out. So I go to the teacher's lounge and tell people this. Hey, you know what? And I didn't even know what to call it then. I did not have a label of forgiving leadership or forgiving classroom management or anything like that. But I went there, and they're like, you let them walk on you, Doug. That's terrible. You'll never last. Well, 8 years later, when I left and went into administration, I was still enjoying the benefits of that interaction, and truly is the reason that I'm here. If I hadn't had that, I would not have. I would have probably been one of those teachers that was punitive and thought that they needed to be punished on every level. So, at some point, I started writing a doctoral thesis, and that's when I ran into Dr. Enright. Because one of the things that was very important to me, and I could not formalize while I was teaching as well as once I started thinking about it in leadership terms, is what was it that allowed me to be successful without any teacher training? What was it that allowed me to move forward and be fairly successful in the classroom and help kids at a level that I thought was very proficient? And it turns out that as I looked at it, it was forgiveness. And so I took what I had learned in the classroom and what I was trying to study, and I developed my graph that I'm kind of proud of. We talked yesterday about Aristotle's what is the negative of forgiveness and what is the positive for forgiveness, and this is my negative and positive of leadership, and it can be for a classroom teacher also, but we don't really identify the negative as much in education as we need to, because when we're negative in forgiveness, we are either usually seeking revenge or we are avoiding a situation. So if we have a situation with a student or a staff member or another person, we start avoiding it, we have bad things happen. So I knew I wanted to get forgiveness into education. So I was an assistant principal when I got my doctorate, and I talked to Dr. Enright, and I was all jacked up because I've got his forgiveness curriculum, right? So I bring it into my school. Now, an assistant principal on the hierarchy of decision making is fairly low. You know, we get to say things, but we really don't get to do things, you know. So I brought this curriculum to our principal and our curriculum director, and I go, hey, this is an amazing stuff. Let's do this. And they went, thank you very much, Doug. We'll give it some consideration. And, you know, I never saw anything. So I knew, hey, okay, I need to get higher up on that chain. So I became a principal of another district down in southern Wisconsin. This time I got to implement forgiveness education. I got to put it into our high school. And it was really rough because teachers are trained to be content specific, right? Hey, you know, I'm a math teacher, Doug. You know, what's this forgiveness stuff? I wasn't trained to teach it. You know, and I've got so much time in my day, and I can't do it. So I just kind of stood very firm, and I said, well, we're going to do it, and let's see how we do it. Not a really good top-down leadership style at the time, but it worked fairly decent because what happened was the kids embraced it. As the story we heard earlier, the kids were more accepting and running with it than the teachers were, and then the teachers had to follow. What happened at the end of the year was our school psychologist always gives a climate survey. At the end of that year, it was noted by a good margin that the kids had noted that bullying, rough talk, and pushing and shoving in the hallways had decreased drastically. They had better hallways to live in. What they also noted was that teachers had worse language and were more bullyish than before. I really don't believe that my teachers were more bullyish or more than any. They weren't. They hadn't changed. But when the kids were more in tune with it, they were able to see it, and that was huge. So then I knew that if I was going to get something on a school-wide, I had to become a superintendent, and I was fortunate, and I'm blessed to be the superintendent in Crandon, Wisconsin. The sad part is, when I left Albany, this is where we had that great year of forgiveness education, is that nobody carried it on. Is that if you don't have that champion, it seems that right now, if you don't have that champion, it's not going very far. So I'm a champion in my district. I am the champion. I guarantee it. There's not anybody else in my district promoting forgiveness education like I did. So I took what I learned from Albany, and I said, we're going to do this in Crandon. This is my vacation in Montana with my wife and 2 friends, but how do I get just click it? There's a video. So first thing you have to do, it's like when you go on a diet and you tell somebody that you're going to lose weight because you're going to be held to it. Well, we wanted to tell everyone that we're going to teach forgiveness. Okay. So as we heard yesterday from Rabbi Sachs, that leadership top-down doesn't really work. And I found that out in my earlier exploits, as I said. So I've got this on my wall to remind me every day that when I come in, that if you want to build a ship, don't drum up people to collect wood and don't assign them tasks and work, but rather teach them to long for the endless immensity of the sea. And so what I'm trying to do, what I do is I model forgiveness every chance I point it out at any given crossroad. And I am putting together a systematic approach to forgiveness education. So if I walked into my school, or I believe, if I walked into my school and said, everyone teach forgiveness, here's your material, go do it, it wouldn't be very successful. So I have to build it within a system. So I took my elementary school, and I did not want to go K-12. I wanted to have people have ownership of things, and then I kind of wanted to build something, as Dr. Enright said, everything in forgiveness can be put into educational things we already do. We just have to start identifying it. We started the elementary with a morning meeting. Because I came to elementary the first time and I said, hey, I got this forgiveness curriculum, you need to teach it. And they went like this: we don't have enough time, we don't have any time, we got to teach math, we got, double-digit multiplication. And so I went back to my office and came back out and I said, hey, you know what I think we really need to focus on is relationships. And they went, oh yeah, you know what, we need better relationships. So that meant something to them. So we start every morning with a morning meeting, and it's got a function, it's got a system of working. But what it's done is we get in a circle, and every morning it's all about, we greet every kid greets the other kid. There's a sharing, and there's a lesson within that. So we didn't have enough time to teach forgiveness initially, but now we've got this 30 minutes that we have time that everything works into a morning meeting. Teachers are finding that it's incredibly, when we first started it, they were like, yeah, this sounds like a good idea. We like this. By the end of the school year, they already know their students so much better. But in those circles, are we not talking about how to talk to each other respectfully and about how to be kind? And those are components of forgiveness. We're starting to identify those then. And these are the 5 pillars. So the middle school, we started with kindness. So elementary had a morning meeting, focused on relationships. Middle school, we started with kindness, which is a pillar and a leg of forgiveness. And our kids are learning to be kind, and they really grabbed it. We've actually have a middle school leadership group that has been trained literally on how to teach people to be kind, and they're doing an amazing job. And when they get to high school, they'll just see that it's a component of forgiveness. The high school taught forgiveness. This was the hardest and the stickiest. This is where I got the most resistance from staff, was at the high school, because again, they're very content specific. So I had to go back to my drawing board, because forgiveness is not getting a lot of traction. We sent 2 teams out to study SMART goals and PAGE. SMART goals, very data driven. We're going to get a GAN, our greatest area of need. We're going to find something that is lacking in our school. We're going to focus on it laser kind of specific and attack it. PAGE is all about best practices. It's equitable access for all kids. It's talking circle or talking sticks. It's knee-to-knee conversations. It's think, parent, share. It's all these best practices. And we merge those 2 together to start training our staff. And when we started putting those together, they said we identified literacy, reading, as our greatest area of need. So now I have the ability to teach teachers that are not reading teachers how to teach reading, which means that I can now teach teachers that are not forgiveness teachers how to teach forgiveness. So we're putting together a systematic approach to teaching a few components at the elementary level, a few components at the middle school, and bringing it all together in the high school. So this was after 1 year at the elementary. This is my school counselor that has read all of the curriculum and uses it in her Tier 3 interventions. So our toughest kids that have the toughest lives get to get the forgiveness curriculum. And I filmed it, so it's not really very good. We got it? Me do, sir. Okay.
I would say the 2 key things I really learned about forgiveness over the past year is that forgiveness, that it's a right for somebody to be angry because somebody did something to somebody else. Somebody's always at fault. And then I also learned that forgiveness is a choice, and it's a choice. When I work with some of these kids who have absent parents, they carry so much anger, and for them to learn that they can forgive and move on, not necessarily for other people, but because of what it does for them to release that anger. Just it's made such a big impact for those students.
That's awesome. How does it fit with PBIS? Does it fit with any programs? Do you use it as a Tier 1, Tier 2, or Tier 3 intervention program, lessons?
I think forgiveness fits in with social emotional learning perfectly. It's all about, building self-awareness, self-confidence. It's about, for kids who are impacted by absent parents or parents who have an addiction, they feel in love, they don't feel important, they don't have any self-worth, and for them to learn that it's not because of them, that this isn't happening because it's their fault, that they didn't do anything wrong, is really powerful. And when they learn that, and then coupled with the fact that they don't have to carry around this anger, that it's their choice. And I think that's the key that I learned in using this parts of this curriculum, is that it's a choice. Forgiveness is a choice, and as soon as they can learn to let that go, it's just, you can see for the kids where they've actually done that, how it impacts them and just who they are.
That's awesome. That's way more than I need.
Okay. You can tell my staff is very willing to talk about forgiveness. But there was a story that came out of those morning meetings that she brought and told me, and that I want to share right now. We had a circle time, so everything starts with a greeting, and then somebody gets to share that day whatever's going on in their life or something that they want to bring in. It's kind of like show and tell on steroids, but anyway, it's very powerful at times. So we had one young man, very affluent in the community. His parents were vacationing in Mexico. Okay, so he came to that morning circle and shared that his parents were in Mexico and they're going to bring him some treats or some presents or something. So they started asking their questions, as they do. They get like 3 questions. They have to be yes, no, and stuff. And one kid said, "Do you like that?" And he goes, "Well, not really, because I have to go to my grandparents tonight and stay at their house. But then they're leaving tomorrow for like Arizona or somewhere. And then I have to go to my uncle's house and stay there." And this little kid, these are first graders. This kid across the circle, very hard luck kid, tough life, tough. Looks at him and he goes, "I hate it when I don't get to sleep in my own bed." And the kid says, "Yeah, it's no fun." He says, "Hey, I go to an intervention group in the afternoon. You want to come with me?" The kid goes, "Yeah." And they trucked off to an intervention group. Now, they made a common ground. We talked about how do we get common ground. We get it through our conversations like this, and we note it when we get it. The tough luck kid, amazingly enough, when he made that connection, his attendance improved, and of course his grades went up when he came to school because he had some inherent human worth. All right. I've talked about how we're trying to build it in the system, and to wrap things up, the last thing that we found that I needed to do, or that I felt that we needed to do, and I've talked with my administration, is once we identify what we want, we have to evaluate it. We have to give it some traction. So we are now doing an evaluation of our teachers with only 7 components. It's teacher language, because we believe that it's very important how you talk to kids. If they're team-oriented. We want them to be enthusiastic. I have staff kind of ask me a few times, like, "Do I really have to be enthusiastic?" I go, "Well, fake it until you really, get it." And effective teaching strategies, stays in their role, because we want people just minding their own business. Student achievement. But we have a component that we are literally evaluating teachers on: flexibility and forgiving. Okay? Well, we have to write what that looks like, and we already have, and the teachers will have that in the fall. But I will leave you with my last slide as I skip this one. But this is something that a middle school principal gave me a long time ago. And it's all I've ever been trying to do since I got in, since I've had those cheese nips thrown at me. And if we approach every day with, "He drew a circle that shut me out, heretic, rebel, a thing to flout. But love and I had the wit to win. We drew a circle and took him in." And I think that's what this conference is all about, and I applaud each and every one of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. As somebody who worked in schools for a number of years before being trained as a teacher and then trained, I can identify, but I don't want to in any way denigrate the professionalism of the professional teacher and what we learn when we train as teachers, and it's not the same as dogs and horses.